Is it possible you could be driving in your car and then suddenly compelled to turn down a road you've never seen before? You have the sensation that something is pulling you, drawing you to a clearing where a strange aircraft hovers near the ground. Aliens greet you, call you by name. They seem to know everything about you, but for some reason, you're not afraid. You board the spaceship, fly off to another planet, and then later return safely to Earth. Good evening and welcome to From Beyond. I'm Joey Travolta. Stories of alien contact seem unbelievable, and the contactees are usually passed off as cons or crazy. But should they be dismissed so easily? Tonight we'll take a closer look.
My present position of thinking, line of thinking, is that we've been visited by extraterrestrial entities for a long time, maybe as long as our history, and maybe even as long as humanity has been on this planet. And maybe we were brought here by them. It's a long, ongoing, extended phenomenon. It's not an event that happened recently. We only have the modern wave of it being reported at the present time.
I'm absolutely convinced, like almost all scientists are, that there's life in the universe, you know, teeming with intelligent life. And I believe that it can get here, and it could happen any day, and it doesn't have to even be what we've been experiencing here. You know, for example, Jacques Vallée says UFOs are real, they are not alien spacecraft. Okay, that's what those are the two fundamentals, I think, of his position. They're real, they're not alien spacecraft. Let's say he's right, but maybe tomorrow the alien spacecraft will be here. And I think it's inevitable, in fact. That's, I guess, my fundamental point here. It is inevitable that we will contact alien life someday. The only question is, you know, when will it openly occur? Maybe it's already, of course, occurred secretly, but when will it openly occur?
There are really two kinds of contactee subcultures, in a sense. There was the one that began in Southern California in the 1950s and went on until it petered out sometime in the 60s, was composed in great part of people who claimed actual physical contact with extraterrestrials. And they provided photographs and films of what were represented as spaceships, but which were all too clearly small objects, models. The belief was that there were selected Earthlings who were in regular communication with space people. They were often called space brothers. They were angelic beings, usually with long blonde hair and almost sort of androgynous features, really kind of angels in spacesuits, basically. And that the universe was densely populated, mostly by advanced, benevolent civilizations with an occult philosophy. There was also belief that there was a minority of civilizations in the universe that were demonic, that were really evil, and that they had earthly allies. And the good space people were, among other things, trying to stop the designs of the bad space people. And also, the good space people were trying to prevent Earthlings from blowing themselves up with atomic bombs.
During the late 40s and early 50s, as many people are aware, we were going through a great technological stage of advancement here in this country and around the world. We were coming to the advent of the nuclear age, and we were rapidly progressing in our scientific capabilities. However, we seemed to be very slow in our sociological parallel of that scientific advancement. When these craft came to visit us in the late 40s, they were greatly concerned with what we were doing atomically to this planet. We were testing our hydrogen bombs on the surface, in the atmosphere, and we were, for the first time, set up in a condition where we literally had the capability of destroying this planet. And some of these crafts and these people came to inform us that we need to be very aware of what we were doing with this technology, and through our ignorance that we wouldn't destroy ourselves in the process. This is one of many reasons why they came to visit us during that time frame. and continue to visit us to this day.
People like Adamski, George Van Tassel, Orfeo Angelucci, Daniel Fry, some of the other leading players in the drama of 1950s contactee movement, were their allies on Earth. Adamski's followers called him Earth's cosmic ambassador. And these were the prophets. These were the earthlings who were here to spread the message to all who would hear. And these guys came from a wide variety of backgrounds and varying levels of sincerity. None of them was telling the literal truth. But some of them were fudging the truth, or more likely inventing out of whole cloth, out of what were basically benign intentions. They had a sincere and mostly benevolent message. You know, people should be nice to each other. They shouldn't blow each other up. You know, these things that you know, all human beings are brothers and sisters. I mean, things that, you know, you're not going to disagree with, and that would be good if everybody believed and acted on. But at the same time, there were other guys who were just sort of veteran swindlers, con artists, sociopaths, people who just saw it as a new way to hustle something.
Only as the 70s turned into the 80s and the 90s have we now all become convinced, or most of us, that UFOs are real extraterrestrial spacecraft. And so, but you know, why has that occurred? That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it should be investigated. I think you can speculate along many lines. One is that just the fact there were UFO sightings just kept occurring. I mean, just reinforced this thing in the public's mind. Oh, yeah, UFOs might be real, might be extraterrestrial spacecraft. The space program is a second factor, obviously. Got us all interested in space. The third is that astronomy has become more of an interesting discipline, with satellites and you know, space telescopes and all those kind of, and radio telescopes searching for extraterrestrial life with Carl Sagan. So that's a whole other area. Fourth area, movies, science fiction, of course. You know, the 1950s thing starting it, because before that, science fiction was pulp novels, amazing stories, and it was a small segment, I think, of the population. But then in the 50s, it burgeoned. So I think all those things enter into it, and I think that the reason the public believes, the fundamental reason, is that it's reasonable to believe. You know, that we all think that there's life out there, and that, hey, why not? Yeah, you know, is essentially, yeah, right, exactly. So why not? Why, you know? And the only difference, in fact, that the public has with scientists is that scientists think alien life exists and it's all far away, and the public thinks alien life exists and part of it's here.
George Adamski, founder of the contact movement, enlightened messenger, con artist, respected researcher, liar. He's been called all of these things. The controversy began in 1952 when Adamski, middle-aged and leading seemingly an uneventful life, emerged from a California desert claiming to have met a spaceman.
George Adamski was, along with George Van Tassel, the most influential figure in the early contactee movement. And whereas Van Tassel was claiming, at least initially, channeled messages from extraterrestrials, Adamski claimed to have met them physically, beginning with an incident in the desert of Southern California on November 20th, 1952, which supposedly was witnessed from some considerable distance by 6 of his most trusted associates. And Adamski wrote several books. He first really came on the scene by co-authoring with Desmond Leslie, who was an Irish occultist, a book called Flying Saucers Have Landed, which came out in 1953. And this was the first full account of Adamski's initial meeting with a Venusian named Orthon.
George Adamski could be considered really the pioneer in the UFO field. He was by no means the only person who had taken photographs of UFOs, but he was one of the very few who went out publicly and submitted his photographs to many agencies, many different laboratories, and really brought this subject out into the forefront of investigations into why these crafts are visiting us and the message that they bring. And Primarily, he started taking first pictures in the late 40s. He had a number of contacts in the middle 1950s in front of witnesses in which this craft landed in the desert, and the occupants, human beings, came out and they communicated for minutes, and then they flew back off into their craft into space. And this repeated itself many times during the 50s and early 60s. This is one of the few surviving pictures from the original contact in November of 1952, and you can just see the shape of the scout craft or bell-shaped craft as it comes above the hill out in Desert Center as it's taking off into space. This was after Mr. Adamski had face-to-face contact with the human being who had come out as the pilot of this craft.
The photographs were created. In fact, at one point, somebody who was close to Adamski, a guy named Gerald Baker, actually saw the model. Baker was a young guy who was close to Adamski in 52 and 53 and personally witnessed many of the things that went on, and later, spilled the beans to a skeptical ufologist, James Mosley. He also said that the initial contact, the November 20th, 1952 incident, was carefully rehearsed before they went out into the desert, and everybody knew what he was supposed to say. And yet, in the end, we really will never know exactly what happened. I don't think it's the literal truth of Adamski's claims is in any way defensible. Those things simply didn't happen. But something happened. Something human happened, and human behavior can be as enigmatic as the most mysterious UFO events. And I think that in Adamski we're dealing with a human mystery. It's not only the mystery of Adamski's real motivation, but also the mystery of what happens to you when you enter some kind of milieu in which miraculous things are claimed and maybe even experienced on some level.
Coming up, more stories of alleged alien contact. In 1977, William Herman had several opportunities to photograph strange craft that trailed airplanes and flew in erratic patterns over Charleston, South Carolina. On March 18th, he was out looking for these UFOs when a disc suddenly appeared. It swooped toward him, paralyzing him with a beam of blue light. When he regained consciousness 3 hours later, he was alone in a field 15 miles from home.
He and his wife were at home after supper one time when a neighbor lady came to the door to borrow a cup of sugar. And as his wife looked out over the neighbor lady's head, she saw the pinkish orange light, which she recognizes now too. She's seen it enough times, she knows what it is. It's Bill's friend. So he says, Bill, your friend is out here, and he came and looked. He says, by golly, it is. He said, I think I'll get my jacket and go out and take a better look at it. It was flying what they have now recognized as a peculiar triangular pattern along the power lines that run down the Ashley River there. And so he got his jacket on and binoculars, put them around his neck, and walked out the door in his little trailer park where his trailer home was parked, and across a shallow, nearly dry, damp ditch and up onto a railroad track that ran about 10 or 15 feet above the level of the trailer park. He got up on the track and started walking down the track, watching it flying these triangular patterns over the power lines ahead of him, probably 2 or 3 miles away, which is not in the air, that's not very far. And he had his binoculars out looking at the object when it dropped out of the binoculars. It dropped like a stone. And he lowered the binoculars to see where it crashed, and he saw it just over the water of the Ashley River at water level, and he thought, oh my God, it's crashed right into the river. When at that point it approached it, it filled the sky like that. And it came so fast and so big and so close, he shied back like that and caught his foot on the rail of the railroad track and began to fall. And he put his hands out to see what, there's a jagged rocks down there, you can get skinned up pretty good to see what he was falling on, and he noticed he was not falling, he was rising away from the rocks, and the reeds, tall grass was blowing away from him in waves. and he looked back, and he's above the railroad track, and he's going up in a blue beam of light.
I was about like this, just looking at it, and then I just fell backward like this.
Yeah.
And at this point, I stopped falling. Oh. That's what I couldn't understand, because I like this, and then the light was all the way around me, and I went to push my hand through, and I couldn't. You know, I couldn't move. Yeah, right at this spot.
Right at this spot.
Because the object filled the area from that bush to that bush. It just filled the area. The light came from the, looked like it came from the edge. Didn't come, at first I thought it came from the bottom. But after the hypnosis and after the recall, I realized that it didn't come so much from the bottom as it did from the edge of the object. You know, the rim, around the rim.
He said that the light felt like a low voltage electrical current, just like that, a cyclic tugging up the beam of light until, and he looked up, and it looked like it went into a cloud. The beam was so coherent, he put his arm out, and the arm went out of the beam, and he could pull it back in. It's in the beam again, but it didn't touch anything going through. And he rose up, and when he got to the end of the cloud, he passed out and woke up on an examining table. And that's the time in between. He didn't remember anything. Of course, when he first came back, he didn't remember a whole lot of that either. That took time to develop the details by stressing his memory to get it.
First thing I remember looking at was this bar of lights flashing slowly above my head. Now this is what the bar of lights look like. Laying on a table, and your head is up here, and you're looking up. You see blue, green, red, blue, green. Green, blue, red, green, blue. You know, back and forth. Flash, 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 flash. And it was doing this. And the slower this went, the more conscious I became. The more able to wake up and look around me. What I saw when I woke up, it's hard to really sometimes grasp, but it was like I thought in my mind there were doctors, or I'd been hurt. I was falling when I remembered the train tracks. I didn't remember the object as much as I remembered falling with the train tracks. And I remember falling, and I thought, oh, I must have broken my back. Somebody must have found me, and I'm in a hospital. You know, and all these thoughts are racing through my head until the three people that were standing there turned and looked at me. And I had noticed that before they had turned, they were looking at this bar of lights flashing on the ceiling, and they were looking at a box that seemed to be off to the side at my feet. And the box was connected to the bed. You could tell it was connected by wires to the bed I was laying on, or the table, or whatever it was. And when they turned and looked at me, it was like all kinds of emotions just surged to the surface at once. Now this is a sketch of what I believe I saw standing next to my bed, or a table, or whatever you want to call it. 4.5 feet tall, with a red garment, looked like a pullover jumpsuit, not pajamas, more military looking. And the eyes were spaced apart like ovals with circles inside, dark circles. And the occupant, when they told me to get up, and it was okay. I heard the voice, but I did not see the lips move. I heard it as clear as you hear my voice.
You heard it in English?
In English. It was in English. Perfect English. Not accented, not deep, not high, just English. I felt afraid because I didn't know what was going on. I felt like this is totally foreign to everything I believe. What is going on here? Why am I here? What is this? All these thoughts going through my head, and all he could say was, don't be afraid. You know, it's like all my emotions and fears were just tossed aside by the comforting assurance of what he said to me. Just, don't be afraid, have no fear, or something to that effect. Come, the time is limited, or something about like that.
Now more stories of alleged alien contact.
The object itself was like a round pancake shape with a dome on top and a dome on the bottom.
Right.
But it looked sealed in metal. In other words, you didn't see no windows or no holes or nothing. It moved in a circle above, I'd say about 800 to 1,000, maybe 1,500 feet above the ground. and it moved in not as obvious triangles, but kind of in a flowing, graceful, dynamical fashion.
Oh.
I mean, just sliding them across the sky, you know. Not doing anything that would give it an impression that it would lose control. In spite of its erratic behavior, you could tell it was in total control of itself. I mean, there was just, it was the most one of the most beautiful displays of aerodynamics I've ever seen, as far as being involved in this subject.
So you tried to take a picture?
I tried. The first shot, I believe the first shot I took came out empty sky. It was moving so fast. I mean, it would go up like this and come back like this. Come around like that, and just watching it was, you know, it was hard, because when it would go that way, I'd run across the field, and I'm trying to get it in the viewfinder, and I took about 4 or 5 shots like that, and I believe 2 or 3 of them came out, and 2 came out empty sky.
They took him to a control panel and sat him down in one of the seats. His escort, who is speaking to him in his language, he hears it in his language, he hears it in his ears, just like surround sound. And he tells him, look, and they pointed to the screen, and another ship just like the one they were in joined them. And then the 2 ships went rapidly again south over continents, over countries and continents, topography, geography changing, just like it's unrolling rapidly, and they approached ground again, the surface, down over Argentina. They took him again to an underwater facility in the Rio Sal, which runs out of a big freshwater lake, a big lake in northern Argentina. And the river runs through Santa Fe, a little town, not such a little town, big town of Santa Fe. And his escort standing beside him. Now, the escort's not buckled into anything. He's just standing there, and Herman is sitting in a seat, but he's not fastened in either. And the craft he's in tilts down at an angle and goes into the water and goes under the water. And there's no inertial change to him. He feels no inertial changes, and his partner's still standing there beside him. And the partner touches him on the shoulder and says, "We were observed over Santa Fe. There will be reports in the paper tomorrow about UFOs." And they went to the underwater facility, and they're being explained to him that they installed this facility to carry out certain hydrodynamic tests in our water, because our water was different from their water.
On the way back, they showed me the reactions of people observing their craft. And he said, "Walk over here." And I walked up to looked like a cross between an open window and a television set. It looked like a TV in that it was like this, but it looked like an open window that I could just stick my hand through it, is what it looked like. And I looked through the monitor, and you could see there was a road, there was trees on both sides of the road, and it looked like an orange grove or some kind of big field. And there was a road running adjacent to it. And there was 2 cars pulled over. One was a Pinto station wagon, a Ford Pinto station wagon, and the other one was a Buick Electra. And there was a lady in the Pinto, and there was a man in the Buick. And the lady was standing outside the passenger door looking up like this, and the man was just standing there like this. And I'm standing inside this object looking at that, and it was like it zoomed up on the people. And he says, "Now watch what happens." The one that was next to me, he said, "Watch what happens when we move closer." The minute he said that, you saw the girl. It seemed illogical, but you could tell it was out of fear. She ran around the front of her car and jumped in the passenger side, reached over there and locked her door. The man standing up, he just calmly, looked like he was trying to keep his cool, just sat down and got in the car and locked the door. Now, he says, "Now watch her. She's going to hold the lockdown." And the only indication of any hostility was what he said next, when he says, "A foolish gesture if we wish to direct observe."
After the examination, and they're escorting around the ship, as they're starting to walk through the ship, his host, his guide, said that they would like him. He said, "I wonder if you could make some arrangement with your government to release a damaged vehicle and one of our damaged ships and the bodies of our people." And he said, "Oh, I don't have any connections like that. There's nothing I could do for you there. I don't know anybody. I don't have any. I'm a nobody. There's no way I can help you. He said, why don't you do it yourself? And the alien said, we have tried. They said, we sent an emissary to try to negotiate a release. They tried to capture the emissary. He successfully escaped, got in his ship, and took off. They tried to shoot the ship down. He said, they're too hostile. We can't deal with them. We're looking for another way. And he said, well, how did they crash anyway? And they told him that they were lost in the western part of your land, they said in quotes, and that the first one they lost was a big surprise to them. And then they noticed that there was a beam, an energy beam, being transmitted in the area there, and they thought that it was a new weapon that we had used against them. And when they lost the second one, they became very concerned because they think we're shooting them down, and they had even gone to the trouble of contacting other associated space traveling intelligences to consult with them on the nature retaliation should take for our hostile actions. And while they were doing this, they noticed that the beam continued to operate, that the weapon continued to fire and was running in a circle for, when it was running, and it wasn't aimed at anybody, and they decided that it was not a weapon, it wasn't what they thought it was. They calculated, though, that the ships went out of control when that beam locked on the ship, on the craft, and stayed on for 90 seconds or more. The computer control system would burn out and go into automatic emergency landing mode. And they didn't have any control of it at all. And they devised a form of shielding, and changed their flight pattern to this sharp angular change in direction that Herman was reporting, so that the radar could not lock on and stay on for 90 seconds or more. It couldn't stay on for more than 2 or 3 seconds. And they didn't lose any more ships after that.
Now more stories of alleged alien contact.
Paul told me on my first visit, and that was what I started with, how did this all begin? And he said that he worked for a power company in California, south of Los Angeles someplace, and that he was checking power lines, and his route was south of Los Angeles along the coast. And he said that he sat down on a beach, a rocky beach, one time. It was a cove, to eat a sandwich, and a man walked up to him, came around the big rock and walked up to him on the beach. He was a tall man. He was about 6.5 to 7 feet tall. He was quite a bit taller than Paul. And he introduced himself, gave him a name, which I don't remember. And Paul, he asked him where he's from, and he says, not from around here. He said, I come from elsewhere. He said, if you will step this way with me, I'll show you my vehicle. And Paul walked around the rock with him, and there was a disc-shaped craft hovering a couple of feet off the water. And the guy took Paul by the hand and floated him to the ship. And he was introduced to some others inside, and he just remained there a very short time. He marveled at the fact that it wasn't in the water. They told him that they would see him again, and they let him out. He never saw him again in California, but a year or so later, he relocated to New Mexico, where he worked for the highway department there, and he was driving a survey truck, a pickup truck, and his particular job was to drive the back roads and look for damage to bridges, rural road bridges. And he carried a Polaroid camera to photograph any damage, because it's easier to show the picture than to try to describe it in a lot of words. And he was in this truck right here that he used with the Polaroid camera on the seat when he drove down this dry riverbed, and there's a lot of willows and scrub that grows in there, 30, 40 feet tall. And the road winds around among these, and he came around a turn, and there sat the craft in the sand. There's 3 women and 4 men outside. They invited him aboard, and he went aboard and looked around with them. They talked to him aboard there for about 15 minutes, telling him who they were and how they had been watching him for some time, that they had he had a special relationship with them, or they had a special relationship with him, that he had agreed to these relationships sometime much earlier, probably before birth. He didn't understand it that way. And that there was a reason why all this was happening to him. And they didn't have any children aboard. He asked them if they had them. They said yes, but not on this craft. That craft came from a larger craft elsewhere in space. They had been coming and going for some time. They said they had other contactees, but they never told him who the other contactees were, and we've never heard of any of them since. They did not encourage him to get any attention over this. They kept a low profile. They did contact him on a frequency of maybe 2 to 3 times a year, and they weren't here all the time. They would come and go, but when they were in the vicinity, they would often make contact with him.
My hypothesis is that these people who are driving these UFOs, or at least the people who designed them, have a technology that's more advanced than ours. I mean, I think that's obvious, that they're more advanced than our technology. Their technology is so advanced that they have figured out a way to artificially warp space-time the way a black hole does, only without all the gravitational effects that rip things apart into their constituent atoms, so that they can actually manipulate. They have some sort of a generator in here so that they can actually produce this field around their craft like a little bubble, a little private universe that they carry around with them, so that they can actually step out of normal space-time into their own private universe and then step back into it at other coordinates. So if that's possible, then they can not only come from all these distant places, but they can also come from parallel universes that coexist with ours and we're not able to see because they're on a different vibrational level or whatever. They can even come, probably, from our own past or our own future. Because as the quantum physicists are telling us now, the past, present, and future are not separate. Our idea of the stream of time is only an artifact of our consciousness. It is our consciousness that's traveling. It isn't that things are happening cause and effect in a linear fashion. It is our consciousness that's doing that. So the past and future actually exist simultaneously with us, and if you're able to warp space-time, you can travel to and from them. Time is not linear. In fact, it doesn't exist. It's just a concept that we use to describe aspects of space-time, and it's an artifact of our consciousness. So this warping of space-time, I think, can explain a great many things about the UFOs.
One day in 1975, suddenly and without explanation, a one-armed Swiss farmer named Edward Billy Meyer jumped on his moped and disappeared into the woods outside his village. He returned saying that he had met extraterrestrials and had pictures to prove it. The photographs showed spaceships hovering in the air, and Meyer was to take hundreds more photos during his alleged meetings with ETs over the next 5 years. Were the photographs fake, part of an elaborate hoax, or was Billy Meyer really in contact with visitors from beyond?
There's a lot of controversy growing around this case, mostly against it. I was willing to take it because of the photographs. I was willing to get involved in it. I'd been exchanging photographs with Lou Zinstag for a number of years. Lou Zinstag lived in Basel, Switzerland. She was a niece of Carl Jung, one of the earlier UFO researchers. She published the first journal on UFOs in Europe, in German, out of Basel. And this event, the first events happened in her own backyard. It didn't take long before she heard about them, within a few months. And she went to see Mr. Meyer at his home in Hinwil at the time, and he explained how it started, and he showed her the pictures, gave her copies of a dozen of them. And she called me after she got home from that, and she said that she had just acquired a few pictures that she thought I really ought to get a look at, that they were uniquely different because of their extreme sharpness and clarity. And she said, she agreed that usually means that they're suspect, that they're done in a laboratory. But she said, I've been to this man's house. He has no laboratory. He lives in a chicken house with a dirt floor. He doesn't have any money at all. He He works as a security guard for a place to live. He gets a small pension from the Swiss government, barely enough to feed his family. Neighbors provide the film for his camera since he took the first pictures. He uses a broken camera that was tossed out by somebody else. She said the lens is jammed just short of infinity. And she said, he has taken these most remarkable pictures. And she said, I'm coming to the States with Timothy Good in another month or so. And she said, if you're going to be there, she said, we'll come by Tucson and I'll show you the pictures. They were, in fact, the best ones I had ever seen up to this time. They were the sharpest, clearest, most beautiful UFO pictures. I decided I've got to go look him in the eye and see for myself how he's doing this. It all started with him when he had been to a metaphysical discussion group where they discussed the Rudive and Constantine experiments in spirit voices. Meyer decided to try this, and he took a tape recorder, which was also a cast-off of somebody else's, and he put a tape in it, put it in his bedroom, closed the doors and left it, wound it back and tried to listen to it. Couldn't hear anything. He did it a second time. Nothing happened. He decided to give it one more try, and then he believed that they were hoaxing the whole thing. So this time, when he wound it back, right at the beginning, when the tape started out, the tape said, Edward, take your camera and go outside. He turned the tape recorder off, picked up his camera, went out and stood outside with it. Nothing was happening. Looked over at his moped, standing on its kickstand there, and decided to get on it. He pushed it, got the motor going, rode down the road, and he rode for, half an hour, just making turns and following his nose, just idly waiting for something to happen. And he ended up in the Frecht Nature Preserve, south of Hinwil. It's a forest game preserve. He heard a humming, whining sound above him, and looking up, he saw a silvery disc-shaped object come out of a cloud and go back into another cloud. And the sound stopped. Then he heard it again, and it came out of the cloud again, and he saw it once more, and it went back in the clouds, and the noise stopped. Then he heard it a third time, and this time it came out and made a deliberate gliding circle, slow gliding circle, down or around over the tops of the forest trees and right down to the meadow where he was standing, and landed in the meadow a few hundred feet from him.
More of the incredible Billy Meyer story when we return. Welcome back. We continue now with the incredible Billy Meyer story.
This time it came out and made a deliberate gliding circle, slow gliding circle, down or around over the tops of the forest trees and right down to the meadow where he was standing, and landed in the meadow a few hundred feet from him. He started running towards it with his camera. He took several pictures of it in its descent. And he started running forward with his camera, and the closer he got, the more he ran into a resistance. He said the resistance felt like standing in a stream with a swift current. And he said the closer I got, the stronger the current got, until I reached a point where I couldn't go any further against the current, and I just sat down on the ground and waited. And then a being came out from behind the craft walking towards him, and he came up to him, and together they walked a few feet back and sat down on the grass, and she identified herself. She said, "You may call me Semyasi." She said, "I'm not from your system here." But she said, "I have a very important message for you, and I want you to remember very carefully." And he said, "I have no recorder or no notebook or pencil to take any notes. How can I record? How can I remember it carefully?" And she said, "Listen closely, and I'll help you to remember it." That's how it all started. And that message was the message pertaining to the decay of our ionosphere caused by industrial gases. And she explained to him that they'd come to him in a neutral country, hoping that the neutral country would take a position on saving the atmosphere, because neither of the Cold War powers were inclined to do so. They were the ones that were doing the exploiting. And they hoped that his government would take a neutral position and seek to stop the action. He said, "I don't have any contact with the government. I can't do anything for you. Why don't you go to them?" And then she told him a very interesting thing. She said, "We have gone to one of your presidents." You know, Switzerland has a presidential council. They elect 5 presidents at a time, and the chairmanship rotates. Every few months they rotate. the presidency, the chairmanship of the President's Council. She said, we have approached one of your presidents. He didn't tell his wife. He didn't tell any of his colleagues. He has told nobody, and he's keeping the secret entirely to himself, afraid of the consequences of revealing it. And she said, that's not doing any good. So she said, she said, the reason we're posing the ships to allow you to take such good pictures is so that somebody will want to know who are they, where are they from, and what do they want. And we want your government to take this position. And here is the message I want you to take down for them. And then she dictated it. So when he got home from that meeting, he sat down in his little bedroom and started to write the message. And then it came through automatic. He was trying to remember what they said when it came through automatically in longhand, and he wrote it rapidly, faster than he can write normally, under some kind of control. And he wrote 15 or 20 pages full, and then it stopped. And he had the first message, and then when he looked at it, he realized that he has gotten the entire communication word by word. So the next time he saw her, she came back, he asked her how they did that, and she said, it's a mechanical device. We have a device that records not only the conversation, but the thought processes as well. And she said that can be tuned to transmit it back to you. And she said that's what we did. As far as I could tell, you know, from looking at it, there probably were three major objectives for Semjase and her team. The first one, or one of them, and I don't know the order of priority, seemed to be her attempt to get Switzerland to take the lead in trying to head off the destruction of the ionosphere by industrial gases, by stopping the industrial processes that were producing the gases that were destroying the ionosphere. A second one had something to do with the North Sea, because several times in Meyer's contact she was called away urgently and had to break off the contact in the middle of it, send him back to the ground, and race off to head off something that was happening in the North Sea area. We never knew for sure what that was. She told him it was no business of his to know anything about it anyway, and she couldn't discuss any of it with him. But we suspected that she was trying to head off the contamination of the bottom of the North Sea by Russian atomic waste dumping. And I don't know how they were doing. They did have contacts in Russia. So that may have been related. The third objective had something to do with something going on in the Yugoslav mountains, and she never would tell him what that was either. And to this day, we don't know what those objectives were. But when they all three failed, she and her team went on to other projects in another solar system in the end of 1982.
No single piece of evidence is conclusive, but it can provide a clue. The challenge is to keep an open mind.